Well, greetings there, friend. I was going to say good morning, but I'm not sure when you're going to see this. But hope you're having a great day. Hope everything's going well for you. Hope everything's lovely and the goose hangs high and you're just doing well and prospering everywhere. You know, we see all these things that happen in the world around us, and we we're living in an ungodly world. That's always been that way. You know, the world's always been against the Lord and against the Lord's people. But not so much now that Donald Trump got elected because he can come in and kind of change the tone of things. But you know, there are times when ungodly people are in control, and when ungodly people are in control, sometimes godly people suffer. And you saw all this stuff that happened during the Biden administration and all that stuff. And my purpose is not politics today, but I'm just kind of trying to set the stage for what I wanted to talk about. When authority or when government crosses the line, um, you know, we just want to live a quiet and peaceful life, serve the Lord, you know, witness and you know, raise up our kids in the nurture and admonition of the Lord, and serve the Lord peacefully and go on about our business. But a lot of times the government will step in, and of course you got authoritarian governments like the communist and you know what is it, China, that has or used to have, I don't know if they still do, have the one child rule where you can only have one kid, and they force abortions on you and things like that. We got freedoms here. We've got our freedoms, and you know, freedom. We got them today. I mean, what day is it? We've got them now. But what do you do when authority oversteps their bounds? You know, when authority comes out with some rule or some regulation or some law or something that goes against what you believe and what the Lord has said. When I was looking in Daniel, I was looking in Daniel chapter 3, but I was teaching this lesson the other day, and I thought I had to throw in Daniel chapter 1. The children of Israel had gone into captivity. They had gone into captivity, the 70-year captivity, and what that basically was God he's getting his years of rest. The children of Israel were supposed to work 6 years and you know plant and harvest for 6 years, and then let the land rest on the seventh year. Well, God blessed them so much for all those years during the 6 years that they decided one day, they said, you know, we're gonna go ahead and plant that seventh year. We're not gonna let the land rest. And so they went ahead and planted it, and harvesting just went about normal business. But when they did that, God said, all right, you owe me one. And then, you know, 6 years later, they did it again. So God said, now you owe me two. And they went along doing that until finally they owed the Lord 70 years of rest, and that's what the Babylonian captivity was all about. The Lord's going to get his whether you like it or not. You can either give it willingly or he's going to get it. And I mean, with your finances or whatever, you say, well, I can't afford to give to the Lord. Well, then you'll give to the mechanic, or you'll give to the doctor, or you'll give to the repairman. It's going to work out. The best thing is put God first and let him handle it. But the children of Israel had gone into captivity, and they'd gone into captivity, and Daniel and his three friends, Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael, were taken captive, and they were good-looking fellows, they were smart fellows, and so they were being taken care of by the king. And the king said, "I want you to give these fellows food from my table, and we're gonna let them prosper and let them eat that food, eat what I eat. It's good enough for me. It's good enough for them. They're smart, they're intelligent, and we want them to be the best." Well, the problem was that the food on the king's table was against God's law. There were things there that God says not kosher. You can't eat those things. I'm sure there was some barbecue in there, pork in there, some shrimp in there, and some catfish in there, and that's all the good stuff. But they couldn't eat it. So what happened was, now here you had a situation where the government, you know, of course they were in captivity, but I mean God's working it out. And the government says you got to eat this, and Daniel had purposed in his heart that he wouldn't defile himself, and so he went to the what's the guy's name, Arioch, or whoever the guy was, is the head of the of the king's men there, and he said, "Listen, let's we don't want to eat that stuff. That's not good for us. We don't want to eat. Let's do a test. Let's let us eat vegetables for a few days and see who turns out best." And the Bible says that God had given Daniel favor in the sight of this guy that was in charge of him. And so the Lord's going ahead, the Lord's working it out. So they gave him a test. They said, "Okay, all right, we'll do it." And the Lord blessed. The Lord honored them, and they were smarter than everybody else, and so that worked out. So there is a time where you can have conflict, and you can go work it out. You can go and say, "Can we be reasonable about this? Can we do this or do that?" And you can get it worked out. But there are times when you can't get it worked out. What do you do then? Well, Daniel chapter 3. Daniel chapter 3, in chapter 2, the king had a vision. He had a vision about an image, and Daniel interpreted the vision, and the king was a head of gold, and all that went on there. Well, that got to weighing on the king's mind. He's thinking about that, and he's thinking about that image, and lo and behold, he just goes and builds himself an image, and he builds himself of an image of himself, and then he says, "Now everybody's got to worship this image." Well, the Bible clearly says for the children of Israel and for us as Christians, but thou shalt have no other gods before me. And so you're not supposed to bow down and worship an image. We worship the true Lord. And so now Daniel's gone. Daniel, I don't know where he's at. He may have been on a business trip or something, but he's not mentioned in this story in Daniel chapter 3. And so the three Hebrews, Hananiah, Azariah, Mishael, or Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they are there. They're leaders in the community. They're leaders in the country. God's blessed them, and they've risen to a place of prominence. And one of the things that hinders Daniel and those guys is people are jealous of them. The other guys are jealous of where they are in their position because God's blessed them. But anyway, what Nebuchadnezzar does, and I got 15 points here. The proclamation, the problem, the persecution, the pressure, the proclamation, problem, persecution, pressure, provocation, profession, penalty, perplexity, presence, preservation, presentation, persuasion, promulgation, promotion, and principle. I don't think I've got anything on there twice. I got 15 points on this, and I'm not going to go point by point. But here's what happened. All right, so the king puts the image up and then says, "All right, everybody has to bow down. We're going to have a big day. We're going to have a day of celebration. We're going to have a government holiday. Everybody gets a day off with pay. Come on down to the plain of Dura, and we're gonna worship this image. Everybody's going to worship the image." And so they had the image up there, and everybody's gathered around, all these civic leaders and all the judges and high muckety mucks. They're all out there, and so now, strike up the band. And so they start playing, and as soon as they play, the instructions were, when you hear the music, bow down and worship the image. Well, the music starts playing, and everybody bows down. Dozens upon dozens, if not hundreds of people, bow down and worship that image, except for three guys. Three guys don't bow down. Now let me ask you something. Why did they get in trouble? It's not for what they did, it's for what they didn't do. They didn't bow down, and they didn't worship the image. But they'd been going along for years obeying God, and it hadn't been a problem. Well, they'd been going along for years, and they had worshiped God and honored God, and they were faithful to God. But now the law comes along and says, you got to worship this image. Well, they said, we're not going to worship that image. Why? Because God told them not to. And they were serving the Lord. They put God first. Let me say this. Put God first, and everything else going to work out. I don't know how bad it might get sometimes, but it's all going to work out. I mean, God's either going to deliver you from death or by death, but either way, you get delivered when you trust the Lord. So the proclamation was everybody bow. So, everybody bowed except these three guys. Well, some of them see them standing there, and they go get them, and they bring them before the king. And now, King Nebuchadnezzar, you can look it up. This guy's a nut. He's got a terrible, terrible temper, and he's a bad dude. You don't want to cross him. And so it's really funny what happens, and this is in Daniel 3. And like I said, I'm not going to read the scriptures, and I'm not going to go point by point, but just kind of telling you the story, and you can go there and read it. But so they bring these three guys before the king. Now I'm sure he's sitting on his throne outside, watching everybody bow down. Maybe he's sitting beside the image. And when they're bowing down to the image, they're worshiping him. But it's all ego, it's going to his head. And so they bring Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego before the king, and he said, "Now, boys, maybe you fellas didn't understand. I know y'all ain't from around here, so this is the way we do it here in Babylon. When the music plays, you bow, and so that's as simple as that. Just when the music plays, you bow. It's easy. Just do it. That was the law. That was the new law that had come down." And that was the law that everybody else was obeying. Why? Because you don't want to cross the king. You don't want to make him mad. He's come up with this law, and you basically got to do it. And I've got a list of there's all kinds of things that they could have used as an excuse to do it, which is the same excuses sometimes that we use when we compromise. And they could have said, well, when in Rome, do as the Romans do, or my heart, I'm gonna do it, but my heart's not in it, or whatever. But it's funny because they bring them before the king, and the king says, now boys, I'm gonna give you another chance. When the music plays, y'all bow down. And these three Hebrews, they say, King, we don't have to pray about this. We don't have to discuss it. We don't have to debate. We don't have to vote on it. We're not going to worship your image. We are not going to do it. And the king gets furious. I mean, he's like, and you see, he knows that he has conquered Jerusalem, and so he knows that his God has overcome their God, and so he thinks he's all powerful. And he says, "Who is that God that's going to deliver you, boys? If you don't bow down, I'm going to throw you in the fiery furnace." And they said, "Well, look, you can throw us in the fiery furnace, and we may die, but we're not worshiping your image." And he just gets infuriated, and he commands that the fiery furnace is heated up. 10 times more than normal? And it got so hot that when they threw these guys in, the guy that threw them in, he died from the heat. And so they tie these three guys up, and they said we're not gonna. I think it's funny that they say we don't need to pray about this. But you see, now get this, they were already doing it before the law came down. A lot of times people want to say, well, nobody's going to tell me nobody's going to tell me to do this or to do that. Well, you weren't doing it before. But when the law comes down, a law comes from the government and says you can't go to church because of COVID, and some people rear up and say, well, you ain't going to tell me what to do, and they start going to church. Well, that'd be a good thing if you kept going. It'd be a good thing if you're still going. But a lot of times people, if a bullet flies through, they won't jump in front of it so they can be a martyr. But it's a consistent walk with the Lord. Seek ye first the kingdom of God, his righteousness, all these things will be added to you. And so you put the Lord first, and then you just quietly, in quietness and confidence is our strength. And we're just walking with the Lord daily. Well, here comes the law that says you can't do that anymore. Well, what are you going to do? Well, if you've been walking with the Lord, if you've cultivated that fellowship with the Lord, the relationship is by faith, but the fellowship is a daily walk with him. And you're walking with him, then you just keep doing the right thing to do. And I hope I don't get myself off track on this, but I just happened to think about Daniel, and I think it's in Daniel 6, but it's a little later on, where Daniel is praying, and his peers, the unbelieving peers in Babylon, they said, we don't like Daniel. We need to get rid of him. Hey, I know how we can do it. Let's get the king to make a law that you can't pray to any other god but him for 30 days. Well, they get the king to make that law, and then he finds out that Daniel's still going to pray. And what did those men do? As soon as Daniel knew about the law, now he prayed 3 times a day, opened his window and prayed toward Jerusalem. That's what he'd always been doing. And they knew that. They knew he was consistent in doing that. And so when the law came down, did Daniel say, well, I'm just going to pray inside for the next 30 days and not let anybody know it. No, Daniel went, opened the door, opened the window, and prayed toward Jerusalem. They saw him, and then they took him to the king, and the king had to throw him in the lion's den, but Daniel was delivered. But what I'm saying is, it was a consistent activity before the law came down. So here we are trying to live for the Lord. Here we are trying to obey the Lord. Here we are trying to, just live our lives for the Lord, and a law comes down, so whatever, and it's crazy. I mean, there are all kinds of things that could come down. But going back to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, I keep wanting to say my shack, your shack, and the bungalow. I know y'all expect me to say that because of those guys' names. But they said, King, we're not going to bow down. We're not going to bow. We're going to trust God. And so he, in a fury, throws them into the fiery furnace, and that's when, the ropes burn off. The Babylonian ropes burn off of them, and Jesus shows up. He throws them in the fiery furnace, and he said, those rebels, we're done with them. No more problems from them. Wait a minute. There's 4 people walking around in there, and the king calls them over and said, didn't we throw 3 people in there? And the other guy said, yeah, we threw 3 in. He said, well, there's 4 in there, and one of them looks like the Son of God. Well, Jesus showed up. They'd been walking with Jesus up to that time, so he decided he'd come walk with them through the fiery furnace. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. He showed up in the trouble. He showed up in the bad time. He showed up in the hard times. And they'd been walking with him. And so, the king says, well, this is, ain't never seen nothing on this like before. Get them fellas out of there. And so they brought him out of the fiery furnace. They didn't even smell like smoke. And the king, he makes a proclamation. He said, hey, you guys, your God's God. We're going to worship your God. Nobody say anything against your God. And, it was a great testimony. And you've got, basically the principle is, if you put God first, he'll see you through. And what do you do? We're living in 2025, and there's no telling what's going to come. I can remember growing up and talking about prophecy and things that would come, and after the rapture of the church and all that kind of stuff, things that would come down the pike. And yeah, there's going to be a one world government, but more and more, it used to be that the Catholic was the big bugaboo during the tribulation period, and I think he's going to be. I think they are going to be. I think the Catholics are described in Revelation, where it talks about the great whore that sits on 7 hills. That's the Catholic Church and the Catholic religion. And so, that's going to have a big part in the end time. But, man, I don't know about this AI stuff. You see this AI stuff coming along, and Daniel talks about a beast, and they cause it to speak. Where you have to have, in Revelation, where you have to have a mark, that you have to have the mark of the beast. And I don't know, you got anything with I was looking to see if I had anything with a universal product code on it. Let me see. Here's a box of staples. There we go. Here's a box of staples. Now, you can look this up. I've looked it up, and it's true. You got a universal product code on there. That's them lines right there. And the first line is a 6, and the last line is a 6, and right in the middle, that line is a 6. So we're already using 666, and I think we're going to have them chipped. Well, we're not, but the world's going to have the chips implanted, and it's all coming together. But I think one group that we never really thought about, I was thinking about this guy, Darrell Dunn, who was preaching back in the 70s, and I can remember hearing him preach about the end time. And he never really mentioned the Muslims and Islam, but Islam has come to the fore since 9/11, and so I think Islam is going to buddy up with Catholicism during the end time, and they're going to take over. But it could be that some of this AI stuff is already being implemented now, and I'm not sure what all that involves, but I'm saying you better be ready, and you need to trust Christ as your Savior now, so that you don't miss the rapture. But going back to the putting God first and trusting Him, and we're living in a time that's slowly turning away from the Lord, and you've got to decide now what you're going to do if something comes up that says you can't go to church, or that you can't use that Bible, or you can't pray, or you can't witness. There's all kinds of ideas. Or you got to do this, which maybe is against the is against God. And what I'm saying is, put God first, and He'll take care of you, even when you don't understand what's going on. Now, Daniel, of course, Daniel was, he'd walk with the Lord, and he'd fellowship with the Lord for years, and so he had a close fellowship with the Lord. And Daniel's reading in, I think he's reading in Jeremiah. I'm not sure where exactly he was reading, but he was reading the Bible that he had, and he read there, and he realized said we're going to be in captivity for 70 years, and he could see from God's word that it was almost over. And he knew that they were suffering because of their sin. Well, what do you do if you're suffering and it's not because of your sin? Think about Joseph. Daniel knew that they were in captivity because of the rebellion of God's people in not keeping the Sabbath. But Joseph was sold into slavery, and he ended up going down to Egypt, and God had a plan in all of that, and yet Joseph never knew it. At least at the beginning, he didn't know it. And so what do you do when things begin to go wrong and you begin to have problems? What do you do? Well, if you've put God first, like Daniel did, you can trust Him. It's going to work out. But you've got to do it now. Don't wait till you get, jailhouse conversion, deathbed salvation. They're possible. But how much better would it be if we just live for the Lord now? Just start today. But here's Joseph. Joseph was a favored son, and he had some dreams. And whether or not he should have told those dreams to his brothers, I don't know, but he did. And he told those dreams about how that, the stars bowed down to him, and how what was it, I forgot what the other one was, that the wheat bowed down to him, whatever. I'm not sure. I'm getting them all mixed up. But basically what he said was, he had some dreams that he was going to be exalted, and that his family was going to bow down to him one of these days. Well, his brothers didn't like that at all. So he was a favored son. He had a coat of many colors. And so one day he goes to check on his brothers. Daddy sent him to spy on his brothers. And so he goes, and the brothers sell him into slavery. And you know the story. He was sold into slavery, and he was taken down to Egypt. And when he gets down to Egypt, he was sold to a guy named Potiphar. Now remember Potiphar, because he's key to the story. And it's heart touching when he shows up later on. Potiphar was a captain of Pharaoh's guard. He worked in Pharaoh's temple, Pharaoh's court. And so he was an officer of the court of Pharaoh. And so Potiphar buys this strapping young 17-year-old lad who claims to be Hebrew and sold into slavery for no reason, and he puts him in charge of his house. Well, he puts him in his house, but he sees that the Lord's with him, and it says over and over again, it says the Lord was with Joseph. The Lord was with him. Whatever he did prospered in his hand. He had the Midas touch. And so, Joseph rises to be in charge of Potiphar's household. Potiphar was the king in the king's palace, and he's one of the king's guards. He's the secret service guarding the king, and so Joseph, after a bit of time, he's in charge of everything in Pharaoh's house. Well, time goes by, and Potiphar's wife, she flung a craving on Joseph, and she wanted to have sex with him. And she says, lie with me. Now, he could have used some of the same excuses that the three Hebrews would use, or could use, that, hey, well, I'm here through no fault of my own, may as well make the best of it. And, I can't really deny her. She's my owner's wife, or when in Rome, do as the Romans do. And so, she's like, lie with me, but he won't do it. He says, no way, ma'am, no, we don't have that move, no, that ain't the thing to do. He said, now listen, when we talked about Daniel, and Daniel had an issue with the food, what did he do? The first thing, Daniel chapter 1, he purposed in his heart that he wouldn't defile himself. That's number one. And then when the command came down to eat that food, he was able to reason with his captors. He was able to reason with the guy who was taking care of him, and they worked it out verbally. You know, he said, let's just let's have a test and let's try this and let's see if it'll work out. And it did. Well, Joseph had tried the same thing. Yeah. Now Potiphar's wife, she said, lie with me, and he said, let's be reasonable about this. He said, no, we don't need to do this. He said, your husband, my owner, has put me in charge of everything. I'm in charge of everything he owns except you. And he said, I'm not going to have sex with you. I'm not. It's not right. We wouldn't do it. It wouldn't do it. It ain't the right thing to do. And so it seems like that he tried to reason with her, and maybe that worked for a while. But she kept on thinking about him, and she kept on rolling it over in her mind and thinking about it, and she kept after him. And so it says a little later on that Joseph, he didn't even want to go in the house when she was in there. If you read the story, it says that he would not go in the house if she was there. So he tried reasoning with her, and that didn't work. So now he tries avoiding it. And look, if alcohol is a problem for you, stay out of the bar. You know, if you're having a problem with alcohol, stay away from your friends that drink, because they're going to tempt you. And so Joseph, he tried to reason with her, and then he tried just staying away from her. He said, if she's there in the house, especially if she's there by herself, I'm not going in. And so he tried to stay away from her. Well, one day he went in the house not knowing that she was there. And so he went in the house to do his business, running the household, and she grabbed him and said, lie with me. And he said, I'm not going to do it. Now look, if reasoning don't work, and staying separate from it don't work, and you still find yourself getting caught by it, then the next thing to do is to flee. And that's what Joseph did. Flee youthful lust, the Bible says. He fled. Joe told her no, and he took off. Well, she got mad. And she kept, he fled and fled out of his clothes. She's holding his garment. He just lets her have it. And he takes off naked. And, they call him the streak, and there he went. But he was more concerned about his purity than he was about his position. Well, she got mad, and so she waited till Potiphar come home from work, and she said that Hebrew tried to attack me, and that Hebrew. Now I think that she'd probably had sexual relations with other servants in that house, and I think that probably that Potiphar knew the kind of woman he was married to. I think, a husband knows. You can pretty much tell, if there's the close bond and the close love there. Maybe he didn't, but I think Potiphar knew the kind of woman she was, because he comes home and she says, that fella tried to rape me, and Potiphar gets mad. He gets angry. But it doesn't say who he got angry at. One would just assume he got angry at Joseph, and he may well have gotten angry at Joseph, but I don't think so, because he'd already put his household in Joseph. He trusted Joseph, and I wonder if he trusted his wife as much as he trusted Joseph in a situation like this, because it says he got angry. He was angry because now he had to do something. She'd made a big deal about it. Everybody knew about what was going on. She'd raised the fuss. And now he's got to do something. And so what does he do? He puts Joseph in the king's prison. He don't have him killed. He could have had him killed if he believed him. If he believed the story, I think he could have had him killed, but he didn't. Put him in the king's prison. Well, that's where a few days later, or a little while later, Joseph is in the prison. And lo and behold, Joseph rises to the top in the prison. Now he's in charge. And the keeper of the prison just told Joseph, handle everything. That same thing happened in Potiphar's house. Potiphar said, just handle everything. Why? Because he was right with God and he was careful. Just like what happened with Daniel. Daniel was careful about the stuff he did. So were the three Hebrews. And so here's Joseph, and he's in prison, and Pharaoh's butler and the baker, the butler and the baker, they were suspected of leading in a rebellion against Pharaoh, against the king, and so they were sent to prison until the king could find out, till Pharaoh could do some investigating and find out what exactly was going on. Well, Joseph comes in, and these fellows are sad, and he said, what's wrong with y'all? And they said, well, we had some dreams, and we don't know what them dreams are all about. And Joseph said, well, God can interpret dreams, and so tell me your dream. So they told the dreams to Joseph, and long story short was, the baker is going to get his head cut off because he was a part of the rebellion. He was leading in rebellion against the Pharaoh, but the butler's going to get his job back. He was the one who would test the wine and bring the wine to the king, and so he's going to get his job back. Well, lo and behold, it happened just like Joseph said it would. He interpreted the dream, but as the butler's leaving to go back to Pharaoh, Joseph says, will you remember me to Pharaoh, because I'm down here for no fault of my own? And he said, you know, I'm innocent of anything, and would you remember me to Pharaoh? And he said, I sure will. I'll tell him all about that man down here that can interpret dreams. And as soon as the door shut, he forgot all about Joseph. The Bible says it went along for 2 years, and he forgot about him. And again, we're looking at somebody that's trusted God, but things don't seem to be working out right. You know, Daniel and the three Hebrews had trusted God, but now they're facing the fiery furnace. It didn't seem like things was working out right. But listen, keep God first, stay faithful. It's going to work out. Well, Joseph, what's it been? 13 years since you've been sold into slavery? For 13 years, man. 13 years you've been suffering. Why don't you just give up and, why don't you just go ahead and cash in your chips and live like the world, act like the world? Joseph did not know what was going on, but Joseph knew that God was in charge, and he had put God on the throne of his life. Well, a couple of years go by, and Pharaoh has a dream. Pharaoh comes into the palace and comes into the throne room one morning, and he's sitting there, and he calls the wise men in and said, boys, I've had a dream, and I need for y'all to interpret the dream. In fact, I had 2 dreams, and it's just puzzling me, and it's weighing on my mind. And the wise men, Pharaoh's wise men, couldn't interpret the dream. And the butler, he's standing over there to the side. He's there at the beck and call of Pharaoh, and Potiphar's in there too. I think Potiphar is in there because that's his job. He's there to protect the Pharaoh, and so they're all in there just going through the routine like they normally do. But Pharaoh has a dream. Nobody can interpret it, and all of a sudden the butler says, "Oh man, I forgot about it. I met a fellow while I was in prison. You put us in prison a couple of years ago, and there's a fellow down there. There's a Hebrew down there that can interpret dreams. We need to send for him." And Pharaoh says, send for him. And so this is, man, Joseph has been faithful to God for 13 years, and he don't know what's going on. But lo and behold, he hears the rattle of keys, and he looks up to the door, and here comes the men from Pharaoh's temple, from Pharaoh's palace. Here comes some men from the throne room and said, who's Joseph? And they said, I'm Joseph. And he said, Joseph, come here. You're going up to see Pharaoh. What? You're going up to see Pharaoh. We need to clean you up. They cleaned him up, and they cleaned him up good, scrubbed him good, and maybe cut his hair. I don't know what they did, but they cleaned him up, and they brought him in before Pharaoh. Now, Pharaoh had them dreams. And for 13 years, Joseph is serving God, but he don't know what's going on. All he knows is God had given him some dreams years ago. And so they opened the doors in the back, and they escort Joseph into the throne room. There's Pharaoh sitting on his throne and all of his splendor and all of his glory. And you know, when Joseph walks into that throne room, there are only two people in that room that know Joseph. There are two people in that room that already know who this guy is. There's the butler who had forgotten about him for 2 years. He knew him because he had been in prison. He knew him down there. And I think that Potiphar was in there. I think Potiphar, as one of Pharaoh's men, one of Pharaoh's guardians, one of Pharaoh's soldiers, I think he was in there too. And can you imagine what was going through Potiphar's mind as he's standing there and he sees his former slave, Joseph, walk by? And I don't think he had any animosity toward Joseph because he didn't do anything to him. He left him in prison. He had to do it, because his wife's throwing a fit. But now, Joseph comes in before Pharaoh, and Joseph interprets the dreams. That's when Pharaoh had the dreams about 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine, and he has the dream twice. And Joseph interprets the dream, and then Joseph says, Pharaoh, the best thing you can do is find you somebody with wisdom who can gather up food during the plentiful times so that you'll have enough during the bad times. And Pharaoh said, boy, that's a great idea. I'm going to get you to do it. And he said, I'm going to let you be second in command over all of Egypt, and you're in charge of gathering up all the extra food that we get during the first 7 years so that we'll have enough to get us through the famine of 7 years. He takes his ring off his finger, puts it on it, calls him Zapnath-Paneah, changes his mind, eventually gives him a wife of one of the high priests, and Joseph is made second in command over all of Egypt. And how did all that happen? All that happened because Joseph was faithful through adversity. He was faithful in the prison, and he ended up in the palace. Put yourself in Joseph's position for a minute, and let's get into Joseph's mind that first night. I mean, look, his situation changed in a day. In one day, he went from the prison to the palace. In one day, he went from the bottom to the top. In one day, because he'd been faithful, God changed his situation. He entered into the destiny that God had for him. And friend of mine, if you'll be faithful, if you'll just keep doing what you know to just keep doing the right thing, God's going to work it out for his glory. He's going to work it out. Joseph goes to bed that night on clean linen and goose down pillows. And he goes to bed that night on a new bed in a palace. Can you imagine what was going through his mind? I'm sure he's thinking back to his brothers and his father and his upbringing back in Israel. He's thinking about all that stuff. And he's thinking about those dreams that he had. And he's thinking about, I did have those dreams about my brothers and my dad bowing down to me. And now here I am, second in command over Egypt. Here I am, second in command. Man, this is amazing. Now he knows that he's going to have years of toil ahead still, because now he's in charge. He's going to have to gather up all the corn, the grain, and store it up. But it's coming into place. It's falling into place. And friend, if you'll stay faithful to God, it'll fall into place for you too. I mean, if you'll just stay faithful to God, it's all going to work out. And he, like I said, he'll deliver you from death or by death. But think about something else. Now, this is the funny part. Okay, so Joseph comes in, and Joseph interprets the dreams for Pharaoh, and Pharaoh makes him second in command over all Egypt. Potiphar's there. So Potiphar goes home from work that night, and he goes in and, takes off his armor and lays his sword aside and sits down at the table. And Miss Potiphar, Potiphar's wife, the lady who had falsely accused Joseph years before, she says, well, how'd things go today there, old Potiphar, honey bunny? How was it at work today? He said, oh, it was an interesting day. And she said, well, that's interesting. What happened today? He said, well, you know, Pharaoh had some dreams last night, and nobody could interpret the dream, but we finally found somebody that could interpret the dreams, and he interpreted those dreams. And Potiphar, the Pharaoh was so impressed that he put him in charge of everybody in Egypt. He made him second in command over all of Egypt. And I got a new boss today. And she goes, oh, that's interesting. That is real interesting. Who was it? and Potiphar goes, do you remember Joseph, that slave I had years ago that you accused of trying to rape you? Well, yeah, I remember him. What's he got to do with this story? He's the one that has been exalted. He's the one that's been exalted, and he's my new boss. He's in charge of all of Egypt under Pharaoh. I can imagine the thoughts that were going through her mind, like, we're in deep trouble now. But I don't think Joseph did a thing. You know why? The same reasons when his brothers came to him after their dad died, and they said, oh, by the way, Joseph, Dad told us for you not to kill, to tell you not to kill us. And Joseph said, hey guys, Joseph wept. He said, you guys meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. And friend, if you'll just put God first, if you'll just put him first, it's all gonna work out. It's all gonna be fine. It's gonna be good. I guarantee it. It's gonna be good. God guarantees it. And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God. You just stay faithful to him, and he'll bless you. God bless you, my friend. If I can help you with anything, let me know. I will talk to you later on. God bless. Have a great week.